The Woman Who Wasn't There. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to Sleepless Historian. I'm glad you could join me tonight. If you're tucked in under the blankets or just chilling in the favorite chair, I want you to go ahead and make yourself as comfortable as you possibly can. We're going to be talking for a long time this evening, well into the night, and my only goal is to make sure you have something calm and constant in the background while you drift off, hopefully into some incredibly deep restorative sleep. Go ahead and take a breath. Let your shoulders drop, and let's just kind of ease into the past together. There is nothing important we need to solve tonight. Okay, so we're all going to be really relaxed. Good, because tonight we're going to try and wade through what might be one of the messiest, most layered, and frankly, most infuriatingly revised stories in history. It's not about some obscure European royal with a weird nose, though we'll definitely get back to those eventually. No, tonight we're looking at one of the original players, a woman who somehow became the blank canvas for practically every male historian, theologian, and artist for the last 2,000 years. Her name was Mary. Not the famous Mary, obviously. The other Mary, Mary Magdalene. And I know we already have an image of her, don't we? It's probably something very specific, usually something in a painting. She's often portrayed with this dramatic, tear-streaked face, hair all messy, but in a slightly glamorous, distressed sort of way. A red dress almost always, and she's usually kneeling or clutching something. It's this picture-perfect representation of the penitent sinner, a woman who spent her life making bad choices, which usually means one very specific bad choice in the language of historical judgment. And now, because she found the true way, she's just very, very sorry about it. It's a great story, it really is. It checks all the boxes. It's relatable, it has a clear moral arc, and of course, it's dramatic. People love a redemption story, don't they? And this one has been sold to us for centuries. Millions of people have looked at those paintings and thought, yep, that's Mary Magdalene. She's the poster child for forgiveness and divine intervention, and the idea that even the lowliest and most fallen can find their place in the big picture. The problem, though, and this is why we're going to be talking about this all night, is that it seems almost entirely, if not completely and thoroughly, made up. Like standard issue total fiction. Which is just, well, it's just really awkward when you think about it. Imagine finding out that the historical figure you've always related to, the one who represents the struggle of overcoming your past and finding grace, never actually did the thing that defined her entire legacy. This whole fallen woman narrative, the whole prostitute-turned-saint storyline, it has a single, definite, and very official starting point. It didn't just bubble up over time like a slow-burning myth. No, it was deliberately, almost efficiently crafted. We can point to the exact year and the exact guy who made it all happen. The culprit was a man named Pope Gregory I, and he didn't even drop this little knowledge bomb in a super important, carefully worded theological text. He did it during a homily. It was Easter, the year 591 CE. He's standing there, presumably in a very echoey church, delivering your standard everyday sermon. And at some point he's talking about forgiveness, and he decides to use Mary as his big example. And instead of, just saying what the Bible actually says about her, which, as we'll get into, isn't much, he just decided to merge her. He looked at a few other women mentioned in the texts, and he went, okay, these must all be the same person. Why not? Keep it efficient. It was like a holy Venn diagram with a weirdly specific agenda. The problem is that the women he merged were two very different characters. One was an unnamed, and I stress unnamed, sinful woman from the Gospel of Luke. This woman, who is never ever called Mary in the text, is famous for crashing a dinner party to weep all over Jesus' feet, dry them with her hair, and then slather them with some expensive ointment. You can picture it, it's very dramatic. The other woman he threw into the blender was Mary of Bethany, a completely separate disciple who also, in a different story with a different context, is noted for anointing Jesus, though with less crying and more just, standard religious ritual. So Pope Gregory I is up there, and he looks at these two women, an unnamed sinner and Mary of Bethany, and he just looks at them and says, they're clearly the same person, and they are both also Mary of Magdala. Why? What was the logical connection? To this day, nobody is entirely sure. Maybe he just didn't want to keep all the Marys straight. It can be confusing, I get it. There are a lot of Marys. There's Mary, Jesus' mom, Mary of Bethany, Mary of Magdala, Mary the mother of James. And those are just off the top of my head. It's like a first-grade class from the late 80s where every other girl is named Jennifer. But Pope Gregory's conflation wasn't just a simple mix-up. This wasn't like a confused grandpa at a reunion. This was deliberate consolidation of characters, and the effects were profound. By smushing these three distinct women into one, Pope Gregory I took the one Mary who wasn't clearly defined, Mary Magdalene, and gave her a backstory, a spicy backstory. He took all the historical baggage of the unnamed, sinful woman, all of the dramatic, emotional actions, and he pinned them squarely on the woman who would become one of the most important disciples. And the result? Instant brand. The Mary Magdalene as penitent sinner brand was born, and it was ridiculously effective. It was like a marketing genius got into a time machine and created the ultimate narrative. Now, whenever anyone said her name, they didn't just think disciple or witness to the resurrection. They thought, oh, right, that Mary, the one who used to be bad. This story, the Pope Gregory version, it didn't just sort of fade into obscurity. Oh no, the church embraced it, the culture embraced it. Writers and artists and thinkers for hundreds of years looked at this specific narrative and said, yes, I can work with that. They painted her, they wrote plays about her, they integrated her into every single passion story, and they always portrayed her the same way, as the weeping, grateful, former prostitute who has been saved. It's almost impressive, isn't it? How thoroughly one person with a single sermon managed to overwrite reality for thousands of people. It's a very clean, efficient way to completely control the message. Let's just ignore the historical texts and substitute it with this much more interesting, much more judgy story about a woman's past. And, it worked. The real woman, whoever she was efficiently pushed to the side and replaced by this character, this idea, this type that everyone can easily understand. And that's where things get really fascinating. When you strip away all that later propaganda, which is basically what it is, and you go back and look at what the actual texts, the actual Gospels from the first century actually say, it's completely different. It's like picking up a novel after only watching a loose movie adaptation. You realize all your favorite characters don't exist, half the plot is missing, and the ending is something else entirely. If we go into the texts that eventually made it into the Bible, what do we actually find? Let's go ahead and list everything we really know about her from those original sources. It's a very short list. Are you ready? First, she was from Magdala, which is presumably why she's called Mary of Magdala. Magdala was a fishing town on the Sea of Galilee. It's pretty self-explanatory. This is usually what historians lean on. It's a way to distinguish her from all the other Marys. Second, she was among the women who supported Jesus out of their own resources. Now, this is a super interesting detail that often gets overlooked, but let's pause on it for a second. If she was one of the women supporting Jesus and his disciples out of her own resources, what does that tell you? It tells you she had her own resources. She was independent. She wasn't some destitute, downtrodden woman of the night. She was a woman of means. This simple, factual statement completely demolishes the popular image. A wealthy, independent woman supporting a traveling preacher and his mostly male entourage, that's not a sinner looking for a handout or some outcast begging for forgiveness. That's a patron. She's essentially one of the primary financial backers of the entire operation. This makes her way more like a high-level corporate sponsor than a dramatic, tear-streaked penitent. Third, we're told in the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Mark that she had been healed, specifically that Jesus drove out 7 demons from her. Okay, let's talk about that. 7 demons. That's a specific number. And again, this is one of those phrases that people look at and immediately fill in the blanks with whatever works for them. When people hear 7 demons in the context of a woman, especially in the ancient world, what do they usually assume? Again, it usually goes straight to moral failing. They think it must mean 7 sins, or a particularly bad case of sexual promiscuity, because apparently everything a woman does can be condensed down to that one thing. But let's think about this a bit more deeply. What did having a demon mean in the ancient world? It wasn't always, or even usually, a synonym for sin. In that era, people didn't have a modern understanding of medicine or psychology, so any kind of affliction that was unusual, frightening, or unexplained was often attributed to spiritual forces. So having 7 demons could have meant any number of things. It could have meant she suffered from severe, recurring illness. It could have meant she was dealing with significant mental health challenges, maybe something that came in episodes, something people couldn't understand. She might have had something like epilepsy, which was absolutely terrifying to ancient observers. It could have even just been a term for any kind of persistent, difficult, and life-altering struggle. The point is, we don't know what it means. The text doesn't say 7 demons which represent her terrible sinful past. It just says 7 demons. But of course, the later church needed to give those demons a name. So they decided demons equal sins, and what's the worst sin a woman can commit? Ah, sexuality. Okay, so she had 7 sexual demons. This isn't interpretation, this is project management in real time. They needed a job for the character to have, so they gave her the only one they could think of. So let's just recap the official script for the character. She was from a small town, she had some sort of serious, unexplained affliction which she was healed of, and she was a wealthy, independent woman who helped fund Jesus' ministry. That's it. That's everything. No dramatic background story of a former profession, no weeping at feasts, no general aura of shame and redemption. She's not this tragic figure seeking forgiveness. She is, to put it simply, a serious, high-ranking disciple. And this is where things get even more interesting, because when you follow the story of the real Mary through the texts, she's not just present, she's crucial. When things get real, when they get difficult and dangerous, at the crucifixion, where are the men? They are nowhere to be found. They're gone. The male disciples, Peter, Andrew, the whole 12-person power structure, they all ran away. They were too scared to be seen with Jesus. Who's still there? The women. And who is consistently listed first among those women in almost all the canonical texts? Mary Magdalene. She is standing right there at the foot of the cross, watching the entire agonizing event unfold. She is a loyal, unwavering presence when all the supposed leaders have abandoned the ship. That's not a passive role. That's a bold, dangerous statement of devotion. And then, she doesn't just watch him die and then leave. She comes back. On that first day of the week, early in the morning while it's still dark, who goes to the tomb? It's Mary, again, always listed first. She's going there to finish the anointing of his body, which was a final act of love and respect. She isn't just a follower who liked the sermons, she's family, practically. She's performing the final, intimate duties for a loved one. And here we have the truly incredible part, the moment that should have made her an absolute superstar in the history of the faith. Who is the very first person to see Jesus after the resurrection? According to the Gospel of John, it's Mary. It's not Peter, it's not his brother, it's not some random soldier. It is Mary Magdalene. John paints this beautiful, quiet, incredibly emotional scene. She's at the tomb, she sees the body is gone, and she's crying. She turns around and she sees this man, and she thinks he's the gardener, which is kind of a hilarious detail if we're being honest. Like, she thinks it's just some random guy working early, and she's talking to him, and then he says one word, her name, Mary. And that's the moment of recognition. It's this profound, deeply personal interaction. And then he gives her the most important job in the entire story. He tells her, "Do not cling to me. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." He makes her the messenger. He chooses a woman to tell the men that the main event has happened. He gives her the critical piece of information that forms the entire basis of the new faith. This is, hands down, the biggest honor you could possibly get. And that title she eventually got, Apostle to the Apostles, that came from a famous, highly regarded male Christian writer named Hippolytus in the 3rd century. It wasn't some modern, progressive rebranding. It was an ancient, highly respected theological term. Think about what that means. To be the apostle to the apostles is a big deal. The apostles are the pillars of the church, the founders, the guys everyone else reports to. And she is the one who teaches them the biggest thing they ever know. So she's essentially the leader's leader, the inner circle's inner circle. That is a position of absolute primacy. This isn't just some little footnote. The earliest Christian communities, when they were small and still underground, they looked at Mary Magdalene and they saw the person who was the first to witness, the first to know, and the first to teach. She was, in every meaningful way, a pillar of their faith, a central, indispensable figure. So how did that person, the apostle to the apostles, the wealthy patron, the premier witness, become the weeping prostitute? How did they pull this off? How did they manage to erase the most powerful woman in the entire narrative and replace her with a stereotype of fallen female virtue? It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just a matter of Pope Gregory having a bad day and merging some women. It was a centuries-long, deeply strategic effort that tells you everything you need to know about how power and gender played out in the ancient world and, well, in every other world since. We've seen what the first texts say, but those aren't the only texts that existed. In the early days of Christianity, before the whole thing was codified into the official Bible we know today, there were lots of different Christian communities, and they all had their own writings and their own traditions. It was a very diverse, pluralistic time. And in many of these texts, the ones we now call Gnostic Gospels because they were left out of the official Bible, Mary Magdalene is an even bigger character. She's not just a witness, she is the witness. She is portrayed as having special secret knowledge that Jesus didn't share with the other male disciples. Take the Gospel of Mary. Yes, there is a Gospel of Mary, and it is incredibly fascinating. It's not about Jesus' childhood or some miracle. It's a text about her. It's a description of her special revelation. The disciples are all upset and confused, and Mary says to them, "Let's not just grieve, let me tell you something Jesus shared with me." And she goes on this deep, complicated theological discourse about the soul's journey to the afterlife. It is some high-level, serious stuff. And what happens next? The other male disciples do not take it well. Peter, in particular, gets incredibly angry. He says, "Would the Savior have really spoken with a woman without our knowledge and not opened me? Must we shift and all listen to her? Has he chosen her more than us?" He can't handle the idea that Jesus would have given special information to a woman and that she would be teaching them. This same theme shows up again in other Gnostic writings. There's the Dialogue of the Savior, where Mary is one of 3 disciples who truly understand what Jesus is saying, and she's called the woman who had understood completely. In the Gospel of Thomas, there's another scene where Peter tries to have Mary kicked out of their group, saying, "Mary must leave us because women are not worthy of life." It's direct, if nothing else. And in the text, Jesus defends her. So what we are seeing here is not a simple question of interpretation. We are seeing a real historical power struggle. It's the battle of who gets to decide the future of this faith. On one side, you had these earlier, more mystical Christian communities, the Gnostics, who had a tradition that included and often celebrated women in positions of authority, with Mary Magdalene as a central, highly respected figure. They valued secret, personal wisdom and believed Mary was its guardian. On the other hand, you had the growing structure of the Orthodox Church, the men who would eventually create the official doctrines and the official hierarchy. These men had no interest in sharing authority with a woman, and definitely no interest in a tradition of secret wisdom that would bypass their control. They were interested in structure, order, and a single, unified chain of command that only included men. So when it came time to decide which texts were correct and should be in the final version of the Bible, guess which ones they picked? They picked the ones that, for the most part, downplayed Mary's authority. And they left out the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Thomas, and all the others that might have shown a different story. They didn't edit the documents, they just didn't include them in the official history. This wasn't just some theological discussion about what counts as scripture. It was a bureaucratic power grab. It was about creating an efficient, standardized religion, and that religion required a standardized hierarchy. And that hierarchy did not include a powerful female figure with her own independent direct line to the divine. This process, this consolidation of power, it's what happens in every startup, isn't it? At first, everyone is excited and it's very open and collaborative. And then it starts to get big and some guys look around and go, okay, we need systems, we need a boss. And you know what? It's probably going to be us. And this woman who has all these good ideas and was here from the start, maybe she can handle HR. Or maybe just stand over there and look penitent. The official Orthodox Church spent centuries standardizing the story. And by the time of Pope Gregory, the idea of Mary Magdalene as a great, powerful teacher was mostly gone, at least in the West. He was just the guy who put the cherry on the sundae. He didn't invent the misogyny, he just packaged it beautifully. He gave the already erased woman a new, much more comfortable, much more manageable identity. He turned her into an object lesson. Her entire purpose became not a human being who witnessed something incredible, but a representation of how much a woman can be forgiven. And as we've seen, it was an absolutely devastatingly successful rebrand. Think about the paintings again. Think of all that art from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. She is everywhere. She's in countless passion scenes, often at the foot of the cross, but she's always this very specific, dramatic type. She's often half naked, because, again, why not, but covered in a robe looking upward with eyes full of tears and anguish. Her hair is often long and flowing, which was a classic artistic symbol of, let's say, loose morals. She was usually a picture of spiritual ecstasy, but it is always tied to her own unworthiness. She wasn't painted as a serious scholar or an independent patron. She was painted as a fallen object that had been picked up and brushed off. This wasn't art that celebrated a person, it was art that celebrated a stereotype and reinforced a theological narrative about female weakness and male-granted salvation. It's just incredibly efficient is what it is. To not only steal someone's story, but to make sure the replacement is so much more engaging that the original is completely forgotten. It's like rewriting history and then turning the fake version into a blockbuster. People don't care about the true story, they want the dramatic one, and The Penitent Prostitute is a story people have happily bought for centuries. And we will be talking much more about how that story continued to develop and what happened to Mary Magdalene next. This is, believe it or not, only the beginning of her incredibly bizarre journey through history. But for now, just relax. Everything we just discussed is in the past. It's just words and echoes now. Feel the comfort of your room, let your eyes get heavy, and just keep breathing slowly. There is absolutely nothing you have to worry about right now. We're safe and we're warm, and we have a very long night ahead of us to just drift and think about things that don't matter at all anymore. Just rest. Just rest. The hermit in the cave. So we've seen how the early church leaders basically performed a corporate merger on Mary's identity, folding 3 different women into one convenient, slightly scandalous package. But the Middle Ages were never ones to let a good story just sit there. If a little bit of drama is good, then an absolutely absurd amount of legendary flair is better. And that's where things start to get really weird, and honestly, kind of lonely for our Mary. Once the penitent narrative was firmly established, the medieval imagination needed to know what happened next. After the resurrection, after the apostle to the apostles bit was quietly swept under the rug, where did she go? The Bible doesn't say. It just stops. And for a medieval monk with a lot of time on his hands and a very limited social life, that silence was an invitation to get creative. The most popular legend, the one that really took hold in Europe, involves a boat. Because, of course, why not? According to the Golden Legend, which was essentially the medieval version of a celebrity gossip magazine but for saints, Mary, along with her siblings Martha and Lazarus, was shoved onto a boat by infidels. This boat had no sails, no oars, and no rudder. It was basically a floating death trap. But because this is a hagiography, they didn't drown. They drifted all the way from the Holy Land to the south of France, landing in Marseille. I love the mental image of this. A group of Middle Eastern siblings just casually floating across the entire Mediterranean in a rudderless dinghy and stepping out onto a French beach like they're arriving for a summer holiday. Once there, Mary supposedly converted the local pagans, performed a few miracles, and then, because the penitent brand required her to be perpetually sorry, she decided she hadn't suffered quite enough. She allegedly retired to a cave in the mountains of St. Baume. And when I say retired, I mean she went full hermit for 30 years. According to the legend, she didn't eat food, she didn't drink water, and she didn't have any clothes. Instead, she was covered entirely by her own hair, which had grown to incredible lengths. Every day, angels would descend from heaven, lift her up into the air, and let her listen to celestial music for her sustenance. It's such a bizarrely specific image, isn't it? A hairy woman floating in the French Alps while angels play harps at her. It's a far cry from the wealthy patron of a revolutionary movement. It turned her into a wild, mystical creature, someone completely removed from human society, power, or influence. It was the ultimate way to keep her safe for the church. If she's a hairy hermit in a cave, she's not a threat to the bishops in Rome. She's just a weird, holy curiosity. The Bone Wars and the Royal Connection. Now, if you have a famous saint living and dying in a cave in France, you eventually end up with something even more valuable than a story: relics. And in the Middle Ages, relics were the ultimate currency. If your town had the thumb of an apostle or the rib of a martyr, you had a tourist industry. You had power. This led to what we can only call the Battle of the Marys. For a long time, the town of Vézelay claimed they had her body. They built a massive, gorgeous abbey, and pilgrims flocked there by the thousands. It was a massive cash cow. But then, in 1279, a local prince named Charles of Salerno, who would later become the King of Naples, decided he wanted in on the action. He claimed he had a divine inspiration to dig in a crypt in Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume. And wouldn't you know it, he found a sarcophagus. When they opened it, the air was supposedly filled with a sweet fragrance, the classic sign of a saint. He claimed this was the real Mary Magdalene. He even found a little note inside, very convenient, explaining that this was indeed her. The sarcophagus was missing the jawbone, which, surprise, surprise, the Pope happened to have back in Rome. When the jawbone was brought from Rome and placed against the skull found in France, it supposedly fit perfectly. It's like a macabre version of Cinderella's glass slipper. This discovery effectively tanked the economy of Vézelay and made Saint-Maximin the new it spot for Magdalene fans. To this day, you can go there and see a gold-encased skull that is claimed to be hers. It sits behind glass in a dark crypt, staring out with empty sockets, wearing a golden wig. It's eerie, it's dramatic, and it's almost certainly not a woman from 1st century Palestine. But it perfectly encapsulates what history did to her. They took a living, breathing leader and turned her into a decorated, silent object in a basement. The Renaissance Makeover. As we glide into the Renaissance, the hairy hermit look started to fall out of fashion. People wanted beauty, they wanted grace, and so the artists took over the rebranding process. This is the era of the Magdalene as pinup. Painters like Titian and Correggio began depicting her in ways that were, let's be honest, pretty thirsty. She was still penitent, sure, but she was doing it in a way that involved a lot of strategically draped silk and very glowing skin. The sinful part of her fabricated backstory gave artists a loophole to paint beautiful women in various states of undress while claiming it was religious art. She became the Venus in sackcloth. It's an ironic contrast that would be funny if it wasn't so systematic. They used her supposed past as a prostitute to justify sexualizing her in her present as a saint. She became the vessel for male fantasy twice over. First as the fallen woman to be judged, and then as the beautiful convert to be stared at. Throughout all of this, the caves, the bones, the oil paintings, the actual Mary, the witness to the resurrection, was almost entirely lost. She had been buried under layers of French folklore and Italian paint. By the time the Enlightenment rolled around, the real Mary Magdalene was less a person and more a collection of conflicting tropes: the whore, the sister, the hermit, the beauty. The modern myth and the final truth. And then, of course, we have the modern era, because we can't just leave a historical figure alone, can we? In the late 20th century, the pendulum swung wildly in the other direction. We moved away from the penitent sinner and straight into the secret wife. Thanks to books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and eventually the Da Vinci Code, a new legend took hold: that Mary Magdalene was secretly married to Jesus and carried his bloodline to France. It's a fun conspiracy theory, full of secret societies and hidden codes and paintings, but in a weird way, it does the exact same thing the medieval church did. It defines her entirely by her relationship to a man. In the 6th century, she was the sinner Jesus forgave. In the 21st century, she's the wife Jesus loved. In both versions, her own agency, her own teachings, and her own independent status as a leader are sidelined in favor of a romantic or scandalous narrative. We still can't seem to let her just be herself. The real miracle of Mary Magdalene isn't that she survived a rudderless boat or lived in a cave for 30 years. It's that despite 2,000 years of people trying to turn her into a character in their own plays, the truth is still there, hiding in plain sight in the earliest records. In 1969, the Catholic Church quietly admitted that Pope Gregory might have been a bit hasty. They officially separated the sinful woman from Mary Magdalene in the general Roman calendar. They basically said, "Oops, our bad, she wasn't actually a prostitute." But after 1,400 years, the brand is hard to break. The paintings are still there, the movies still cast her that way. The fallen woman is just too good a story to let go of for something as boring as independent female financial supporter. But we know better now, don't we? As we sit here in the quiet of the night, we can see her for who she likely was: a woman of means, a woman of immense courage who stayed when the men ran, and the person trusted with the most important message in her faith's history. She wasn't a victim of her past, she was a victim of historians. And as we finally let the story of Mary rest, I want you to feel that same sense of clarity. The noise of the world, the labels people try to put on us, the messy revisions of our own lives, they don't have to matter tonight. Like Mary, the truth of who you are is much simpler and much quieter than the stories told about you. The lights are low now, the history is settled, the kings have stopped shouting, the hermits have stopped wandering, and the boat has finally reached the shore. There's nothing left to prove and nowhere left to float. Just the steady rhythm of your breath, just the cool air in the room. You've traveled a long way through the centuries tonight, and you've earned this stillness. Go ahead and let your mind go completely blank. No more names, no more dates, no more golden skulls or mountain caves. Just sleep. Deep, heavy, timeless sleep. Would you like me to tell you another story tomorrow night, or should we just let the silence linger for a while? Sweet dreams.
The Great Silence and the Byzantine Alternative. I know. I said we were wrapping up, but the thing about Mary Magdalene is that she just doesn't stay put. She's like that one guest at a party who you think has left, but then you find them in the kitchen 20 minutes later, having a very intense conversation with the cat. You can't really finish her story without looking at the other version, the one that didn't involve French caves or golden wigs. While the Western Church was busy turning her into a weeping pinup, the Eastern Orthodox tradition in Byzantium had a completely different vibe. They didn't really buy into the penitent prostitute rebrand. For them, she remained equal to the apostles. Their legends didn't send her to France in a rudderless boat. They sent her to Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, where she supposedly lived out her days with Mary, the mother of Jesus, and John the Apostle. It's a much more professional retirement, isn't it? No hair clothes, no angels lifting her up for lunch, just a woman living out her life as a respected elder in a growing community. But even the East couldn't help themselves with a bit of flair. They have the legend of the red egg. The story goes that Mary traveled to Rome and got an audience with Emperor Tiberius, which, if true, would be the ultimate "I'd like to speak to the manager" move in history. She supposedly held up an egg to explain the resurrection, and Tiberius, being a cynical Roman, said a human could no more rise from the dead than that egg could turn red. And of course the egg immediately turned bright crimson. It's a charming story, and it's why Eastern Orthodox Christians still dye their eggs red at Easter. But again, look at the contrast. In the West, she's a symbol of female shame. In the East, she's a bold witness standing up to an emperor. It's the same woman, but two completely different scripts, written by men who wanted her to represent two completely different things. It makes you wonder if anyone ever just asked her what she wanted to be remembered for. Probably the funding the entire ministry part, I'd wager. The Magdalene laundries, a darker legacy. We have to touch on this, even if it's a bit heavy for a bedtime story, because it shows how words can have real physical consequences centuries later. Because the church insisted for 1,400 years that Mary was a fallen woman who found redemption through labor and penance, her name was used to justify some of the most heartbreaking institutions in modern history. The Magdalene laundries. In Ireland and elsewhere, well into the 20th century, thousands of wayward women, many of whom had done nothing more than get pregnant out of wedlock or just be too pretty for their own good, were sent to these laundries to work in silence and prayer. They were told they were following in the footsteps of the Magdalene. It's a tragic irony, isn't it? A woman who was likely an independent, wealthy patron of a movement for social and spiritual liberation became the namesake for a system of incarceration and forced labor. This is what happens when you let a bad metaphor run wild for a millennium. You end up with a saint whose name is used to punish the very people she likely would have been supporting. But even that dark chapter is closing. The laundries are gone, the apologies have been issued, and the penitent label is slowly being peeled off the historical record like a piece of old, dried-out tape. The final descent into sleep. So here we are at the end of the line. We've stripped away the red dress, the jar of ointment, the 7 demons, the French cave, and the secret bloodlines. What's left? Just a woman. A woman who lived in a dusty fishing town on the edge of a lake. A woman who saw something she believed in and put her money where her mouth was. A woman who stayed when everyone else was terrified, and who was the first to speak a truth that would eventually change the world. She doesn't need the drama. She doesn't need the hairsuit or the golden skull. The real Mary Magdalene is much more interesting than the myth because she was a person, not a parable. She was a leader who was erased, a teacher who was silenced, and a friend who was remembered eventually for all the wrong reasons. But tonight, we remember her for the right ones. Or better yet, we just stop thinking about her at all. The history is done. The books are closed. The ink has dried on the page, and the characters have all gone home. The world outside is quiet now. The cars have stopped passing, the birds are silent in the trees, and the only thing that matters is the soft rhythmic pull of sleep. You've done the hard work of listening. Now you get to do the easy work of letting go. Feel your feet getting heavy. Feel your legs sinking into the mattress. Your hips, your back, your shoulders, just let them melt. Your jaw is relaxed, your eyes are closed. There is a vast, dark, peaceful ocean of sleep waiting for you, and all you have to do is let yourself drift out into it. No more questions, no more mysteries, just the deep, dark, beautiful quiet. Sleep now, just sleep.